Okay, my friends, we'll go ahead with the lesson then. We're continuing lessons on the book of Revelation. And we just finished talking about the great struggles that the disciple has, that's symbolized by the war of composed of 200 million entities, so to speak. And basically, it's the destruction of the things that impede the disciple and the people that he's working with. And we're at this point, it talks about, after dealing with many of these struggles, it says, neither they repented of their murders or their sorceries or their fornications or of their thefts. This illustrates what needs to be conquered, so to speak, in order for the divine work to be accomplished. And so, murders. Okay, well, let's say a disciple is working with, has a message from his higher self, and he's working to make things happen. Where do the murders come from? It says that we're talked about a third of humanity was killed. It said earlier, in other words, a third of the impediments between spirit and matter for the disciple and perhaps the people he's working with. And yet it says those who were left over, it says they didn't repent of their murders, of their sorceries, or their fornications, or their thefts. But what's interesting about these is their application is much broader than you might think. Murders. Now, murder happens on a lot of different more levels than people suspect. For instance, many people feel that abortions, especially late-term abortions, is equivalent to murder. And some people are even supportive of killing the baby right after it's born. I mean, there's been people even go that far. So that could be an aspect of murder. Now, war, if a person supports an unjust war, then that would be supporting murder. On the other hand, not going to war, if it's really justified, could be supporting murder. Like before World War II, nobody wanted to go to war against Hitler, and what happened? Wound up with 6 million Jews murdered because nobody took action against Hitler to suppress him. And so by not taking action, many murders were committed. So there has to be judgment as far as the action taking, as far as wars go. Some wars are justified, some wars aren't. When it talks about the coming of Christ in the book of Revelation, it says, and with judgment does he execute war. So this everything has to be done with judgment, and the judgment has to be done in connection with your own soul to be accurate. If you're making judgments without checking with your inner God, then the judgments will always have some distortion to them. But if you're in contact with your inner soul, then your judgment will be very accurate. But judgment is not something that you can just have a formula for, like 2 + 2 = 4. It's something that has to be done, accomplished through, if it's going to be accurate, there has to be some degree of soul contact. Okay. And drugs is another one. Many of these drug companies and also the gangs, cartels that smuggle drugs in, cause many deaths. And the people that are working with these drugs, not only the illegal ones, but some of the legal ones, are responsible for many deaths. So this is an area where a lot of murder takes place that's not classified as being murder, but it's still responsible for many deaths. And then crime. If there's a lot of bad judgment in the world that allows, right now, many criminals have been released, and it's caused many unnecessary deaths, and a lot of people support policies that result in increased crime, and increased crime produces increased deaths. And so this has to be looked at again with good judgment. You can't go too soft or too hard. It has to be somewhere in between. You need to be able to reach that balance. And the trouble with humanity is they always swing one way or the other. They want to really be super tough on criminals or super soft, but there's a balance in between that always has to be reached. And so the things that the disciple that isn't perfect yet, or his people he's working with that they may support, will actually oftentimes result in a big increase in deaths. And so this is something that the disciple must be aware of, that the disciple will never just be wanting to, commit murder or that type of thing. He's beyond that. But there's a lot of illusion out there, and if he taps into the wrong illusions, then he can wind up being supportive of policies that will increase the death rate among humanity. Okay, the second thing.
JJ.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that would encompass anything, right? What you're saying, to include like the
To include what?
so you that doesn't just that's not limited to just the things you're talking about. That encompasses anything that fits into that framework that you're talking about. That if illusion is being made, it is being used to perpetrate a wrong on a group of people that is causing, that could cause their deaths, is what
Yeah,
we need
yeah.
to look out for.
The key of judgment is applies to many different things, and misjudgments, just like misjudgments that led to the war in Ukraine, is resulting in hundreds of thousands of deaths, which could have been avoided. If the various politicians involved would have used just a little bit better judgment, wouldn't have taken a lot better judgment, just a little better judgment.
It
And
would have taken about 80 tanks on the front line. And they say, and if some country would have the guts to say, okay, Russia, cross this line and see what happens. But as it was, yeah, millions of people were killed unnecessarily because no one stopped the aggressive energy of Russia.
or if we would have just continued drilling for oil the way we were doing, Putin wouldn't have had the money to start the war. Because
Right.
he's got his money to run this war through the high price of oil that's really financing the war for him. Because Russia had lots of
And
oil and natural gas.
my mind, while you were talking about that, uh, I was thinking about all the lobbyists in Washington that pay to get their congressman to vote their way, and it has nothing to do with what is best for the people, but what is best for that lobbyist group. And an example of that would be the food chart, that came out, whatever, 40, 50 years ago. The recommended, the government recommended the food groups, and lobbyists put that together, and then we're reaping the benefits of that now, which is we're the fattest nation on the earth, and we have the most diabetes and everything else, in
Yeah.
large part because we were fed that bad information. So that's another thing that you're talking about right there, that illusion that is we should have been tipped off to by our souls and listening to, and
Yeah, just about
because
every
that
problem,
caused
everyone complains to the politicians about could have been avoided with a little bit of good judgment. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. It says, okay, murders was the first thing that there's still problematic. Second is sorceries. Now, the interesting thing about sorceries, it comes from the Greek word pharmaia, from which the modern word pharmacy comes. So what does
Oh,
that tell you?
pharmaceutical.
Yeah. So the sorceries, if we interpret that to be the modern movements of the drug world, from the legal and the illegal drugs, they both pose a major problem for humanity. And many aspiring disciples buy in to their supposed benevolence when they are not benevolent at all. And so most of the disciples eventually come to the conclusion to just avoid them pretty much completely and treat themselves by natural methods. And this will be a tremendous boost to their vitality and their health, as well as their spiritual welfare. The average person my age takes about close to a dozen different pharmaceuticals. It's just fantastic. And I don't take any, but but it's amazing. They get people on a couple drugs, and then they get side effects. So then the side effects demand more drugs to counter the side effects, and then they get additional side effects. So they get additional drugs to counter these side effects, and so they a lot of people my age wind up taking a dozen drugs. I don't know how they can function, really, but
They're
so.
zombies.
So it's interesting that this word sorcery comes from the same word that pharmacy comes from, which is the dispenser of drugs. And so definitely the society as a whole is not repenting of their sorceries or their pharmaceutical misapplication. Now, there's a handful of pharmaceuticals that are beneficial, but overall, there's way more that are doing more harm than good that could be treated by natural methods. Isn't that right, Red?
You look at the warnings. In the last 30 years, the pharmaceutical companies have introduced over 100 new drugs, the names of which you can't remember or even pronounce. And the side effects, include everything from blindness, impotency, liver, kidney, heart disorders, and death.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like they've had to create new diseases nowadays that I've never heard of so they can sell new drugs.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ed. Every once in a while, you hear a new disease showing up or say, some old diseases that were really rare now are becoming much more permeated of society. It's just amazing how that happens.
Yeah, COVID, for example.
Yeah, and dementia is just, and Alzheimer's has greatly increased, and a number of diseases has greatly increased. And so, which demands a lot more drugs, and then the drugs seem to make more of them show up. Okay, any more comment on that? I find that kind of interesting. The word sorcery and pharmaceutical comes from the same Greek word.
Just a quick comment on that, JJ. I wasn't aware that the origin of that sorcery word, but it makes sense if you connect the dots between three things that we're talking about. Number one, DK, when he was when he had his little school going and he was gathering disciples, he had a rule that you couldn't be diseased and in the throes of affliction, because it required, what he was doing required concentration, and if you were in pain and in the midst of suffering, you couldn't concentrate at the level that was needed to do what he was doing. So then you combine that with the absolute the illusion that is fed to the masses about what is good to eat. Okay. And that results in the illusion of the pharmaceutical, then the pharmaceuticals are needed to treat the masses because of the diet they've been on for, that they thought was decent, and
Yeah,
so they all go hand in hand. You can't make serious progress on the spiritual path if you are in pain and suffering. And so that's just a whole nother thing the Dark Brotherhood is focusing on. And they've just drenched that whole area in illusion.
yeah. It seems
And
kind of hard-hearted, but it's very practical. That yeah, you're right. If a person's on a bunch of drugs and he's in pain, he's not a really good prospect for a, a, a spiritual group like the Tibetan had. And so it's important that we maintain our health. And the trouble is, if you do take a bunch of drugs, they just dull your consciousness. And so that makes it a lot harder for the person to focus on soul contact and this type of thing. Okay, the next
Yeah,
thing.
the other
Yeah,
thing is 3 square meals a day. Uh, if you I think you pollute your body if you absorb 3 huge meals a day. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy from your body. I eat one big meal a day and that's it, and maybe a
good.
snack. Or
Yeah, well, good for you. Yeah, the
how about
Tibetan
you?
says that we eat about twice as much as we need to eat on the average. I found that interesting statement, which is probably true. Okay, the next thing he says is a problem is fornication. Now, fornication is quite a has a lot of misunderstanding connected with it. But to understand what the the scriptures mean about fornication, you have to look at the scriptures themselves. And it talks about fornication in a quite a bit different way than the average fundamentalist interprets it. It condemns fornication. So fornication is where you, according to the actual scriptures, is where Israel was accused of fornication in the fact that they took their focus, their attention, their worship away from the true God and put it on idols and false gods. Okay, so we look at fornication among the masses of humanity today, and what do? Do they check with the true God? And where do we find the true God? Within. We find the true God within. And instead of checking with the true God for what is right, say the doctor tells you you have 6 months to live and you got to do ABC, the average person will just say, well, I accept that and I'm going to go with whatever you say. Okay. Instead, and that's fornication, in other words. So if he's not committing fornication, instead, he will check with the true God within, and he will say, well, what do you say, soul? Shall I do this, or what shall I do in this situation? And he checks with the true God, okay, on everything. And if he's relying on the outer authorities, which we've taught is the beast in the book of Revelation, which we're going to cover here shortly. But if he relies on outer authorities above the inner authority, then he's committing fornication according to the way the scriptures are written. And so we see fornication is very prevalent among humanity because they trust their outer authorities over their inner. I mean, just look at the news. The news is broadcast, and if somebody that's an authority figure presents something that everybody's supposed to do, they just do it without thinking, without checking with their inner self. And if they check with their inner self, it may tell them, no, this is not correct. And so this is important, to always check with your inner self. If the disciple is not doing this and is following the outer authorities, now listening to the outer authorities is fine, but you have to confirm what they say with the inner, because sometimes outer authorities are right. I'd say right maybe 10 or 20% of the time. but when they're right, and if your soul says, yeah, this advice was good, then if you go with it, then that's not committing fornication. But if you just listen to the outer authorities and don't check with your inner self, then you're committing spiritual fornication as it's defined in the scriptures, which is totally different than the average fundamentalist would read this particular thing. Okay, any comment on that? Everybody want to cease their fornication here and go with the inner
Well,
God?
to add to that, like you talked about earlier, we would add the fact of being lazy, because especially in these election years, you've got media who just drums on one point, and through repetition, a large percentage of the masses just start believing something because of the repetition, and they don't take the time to fact check or find out the truth on there, or go inside and see what the truth is. They don't take any time to search out the truth. So through repetition and being lazy, they allow themselves to be influenced. So that would be another form of fornication. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Because this is what the media does: is the media decides that this is something they want to convince the public of. It's like they're almost of one mind sometimes, and so they hit us over and over and over until we start believing things that maybe 10 years ago we thought was crazy. and 90% of the public thought was crazy. But if the media hammers on it long enough, then the majority of people start just going along with it. And it's interesting how that happens, and they don't check with their inner God.
When you trust your own soul, you know, you kind of have to decide what qualities do you want to have governing you? What qualities do you want to have in leadership?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you an example. When COVID came out and the media was hammering to the mass consciousness of humanity to get vaccinated, I thought, well, is this something I really want to do? And something inside of me says, no, do not get vaccinated. And everybody around me, well, we're doing it. How come you're not doing it? You should be doing it because we're doing it, and all of that. I said, I don't give a damn what you say or what you think. I'm not doing it, and I never did, and it never affected me.
Right.
So,
Matter of fact, if the disciple has a high degree of soul contact, he has a very powerful natural immunity on his own and doesn't have to worry about that, to the point to where the scripture says you can even be bit by a poisonous serpent and it will not hurt you. And that would be if the person is in a high enough degree of spiritual contact, he can have immunity from just about anything. And this is what the disciple needs to aspire toward. And the average seeker out there just needs to aspire toward just good health and good common sense. And
that's interesting. You can be bitten. That's kind of the message I got. Just trust in me, and you will be well. And
yeah, I had the same thing happen. Artie and I didn't get vaccinated. We just felt impressed not to, and everybody around us thought we were crazy.
yeah,
So it's
yeah. You get vaccinated. How many new strains of the virus have been introduced? You got to get vaccinated like every 3 months with the new vaccine.
but we didn't do anything different, and we didn't get the virus, and everything's been cool. So anyway, the last thing it says is steps. So what the disciple has to look for, and the average decent person out there isn't out stealing a bunch of stuff, but there's all kinds of different ways to steal. You can take credit where credit is not due, for instance. But the main type of theft the disciple has to pay attention to is the theft from God, the true self, because the temptation to identify with the false self, the false personality over your true self, is like stealing from the extension of God, your true identity. Your true identity is as a son of God that is unlimited in power and will. Whereas when we limit ourselves, we're stealing away our true identity. And so we need to reclaim our true identity. And if we can reclaim our true identity, we can overcome all things. And so that's an important item. Okay, that finishes up that chapter. Any more comment on that?
Well, you're stealing from yourself, basically, then, huh?
Yeah. And it steals from God in the aspect that God wants to be able to have you as an extension of himself that he is usable and that he can communicate with, and that if he is unable to communicate with you, you're stealing that away from him. And so we need to give ourselves back to our source so there can be full communication.
That's interesting. You know, most people never would have thought of that, Joe. And there you made it very clear. Kudos to you.
Well, thanks, Curtis.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to chapter 10. And chapter 10 is about discovering the mission. Okay, the disciple moves along in his progress, and he's most disciples out there are really unclear as to what their mission is. And eventually they discover they do have a particular mission. And this is represented by this little book that John has given in chapter 10. And this is what we'll discuss in our next class then. We don't have time to go into it in this one, but this is kind of an interesting topic about the disciple discovering his mission. I imagine everybody here is an aspiring disciple of some kind. Have you ever had when you were younger, did you have a sense of mission and wonder what you had a feeling that you were supposed to do something, but you weren't sure what it was? Anybody have any comment on that question? How about you, Asaf? Did you, when you were younger, did you have a sense that you were supposed to be doing something but didn't know what it was?
Yes, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it was correct actually until now. Even now, because I have a sense that really I needed to go um, to advance the science of physics.
Yeah.
And I didn't go for it. I didn't do that.
Yeah, many disciples go through a number of lifetimes where it's not clear. They're just doing the best they can, and eventually they reach a point where where it becomes really clear what they're supposed to do. And this is where the disciple reaches in the next one here. Let's pick on somebody else here. Annie, we haven't heard from you today. When you were younger, did you have that question in your mind that there was something you were supposed to be doing but didn't know what it was?
Yeah, in a way. I think I felt like, well, I was busy with family and stuff when I was around 30, but I had the feeling that there was something else I should do. There was kind of a third chapter in my life, you could say, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I also had the feeling, I mean, I learned a lot from different teachers also here in Denmark, but I always had the feeling I have to find the true teacher. I have to find somebody to get things directly from the source. I mean, yeah, something like that. And then I found you.
Yeah.
And I felt fulfilled.
Yeah. And no matter who you are, I think I would imagine even Jesus, when he started his life, was wondering, I feel like I'm supposed to do something. I wonder what it is. I would assume that even he went through that process. And like I say, for the beginning disciple, he may go through maybe a dozen lifetimes before that really becomes clear in his mind at an early age. And it's something that everybody's born with. Can others that kind of identify with that process? Anybody want to comment?
Well, when I was 13, I started in the first year of high school, and we were supposed to write a story about what we wanted to be when we grow up. And I think I thought about I wanted to be an inventor, and that's kind of a vague sort of an idea. But I've always felt that I wanted to use my creative imagination in everything I was faced with, and That's what I've tried to do. But I think that was kind of a vague thing. My brother, on the other hand, he knew he wanted to be an electrical engineer, and that's what he was. He followed that through all his career.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We and like say, average people, they will look at it as far as their profession that they want to be. Now, for the disciple, he'll feel like an inner guidance that he's supposed to be doing something beyond a career, but for some type of service, but he doesn't know for sure what it is or how to go about it. And so, yeah, uh, everybody has that question on some level, whether it be career or whether it be in harmony with the will of God or whatever. So it's an interesting process. We'll be talking about that next in the next class. And okay,
Hey, JJ,
yeah,
I'll throw some in there. So I did have that feeling. I never from the time I was a small child, I never had the feeling that it was going to be something career related. I never did have a clear understanding of what that would be. It was very obscure, and it's just something I was always wondering about. But I did have this experience with my mom. Now my mom was Mormon, and she was not a extreme Mormon, but she did her best to be an active, Mormon. And she took me aside on 3 different occasions when I was a small boy, and she said, "Scott, something happened when you were born that she goes, something very special happened." And she goes, "You're different than other people."
yeah,
And I wondered what that meant. And she goes, and I go, "Well, I couldn't understand what that meant." And she said, "Well, she goes, it was something spiritual that happened." She goes, "And I don't know what that was, but it didn't happen with your brother or sister." And she goes, "I don't want you telling your brother and sister that I'm telling you this, but something very special happened when you were born." And she said it to me on 3 different occasions. And one time she said it with tears in her eyes, and then another time she said it. I said, "Mom, you're just saying that because you're my mom and you're just trying to say something nice to me." And she said, "No, Scott." She goes, "I'm telling you the truth." And I've never told anyone that, but my mom passed away while I was in prison, and that was the very first thing I thought of when I found out. Uh, because I felt like I'd let her down, and because I obviously had not done anything uh, special. But I had always had that feeling that there was something for me to accomplish on a greater level than just being here and living life. And
yeah, yeah. Well, great.
all right.
Well, this is the first day of the rest of your life, Scott. So you